I'm Jay Marshall, student at Liberty University in history, and I'm standing in front of the entrance to the old Forbes and Wallace that many years later would end up being a JCPenney's. And I'm here to ask the important question, do malls deserve preservation? I mean, after all, weren't they to blame for the decline of downtowns and the ruination of cities as we knew them? For the most part, we've lost our downtown history, and it would be a shame to lose this as well. And in fact, what other than scope and size and years is different between this and a picturesque shopping locale like Faneuil Hall? I'm standing outside the Eastfield Mall. The Eastfield Mall was constructed in 1967, would go on to open in 1968, and it was the first real shopping mall, enclosed shopping mall in Western Massachusetts. And when it opened, that building behind me there was Forbes and Wallace. And that was one of the major anchor stores. Unfortunately, word came out some years ago, fortunately and unfortunately, the mall has not been successful in recent years. Had a little bit of a renaissance maybe at the end of the 90s when it got its movie theaters back for a time. But it has fallen on hard times, and word came out recently that it would be demalled. Now, what exactly does that mean, demauling? What is demauling? Well, I'm standing in the middle of the Fairfield Mall in Chicopee. You'll notice that it's now a parking lot featuring a Home Depot, a Walmart, a Panera, a Staples. The Fairfield Mall that opened in 1975 ended up getting demalled in about 2004 and was replaced with big box stores. So whereas when it opened in 1975, it featured Two Guys, a department store perhaps no one has heard of, and a Forbes and Wallace, those ultimately would close and be replaced by a Caldor and a Bradley's, which would also close, and the mall would fail. And so there's nothing that remains of the Fairfield Mall except a few websites and one last sign that says mall that I'm pretty sure everyone forgot about. So I'm actually inside the Eastfield Mall, and as you can see, this is the old entrance to the Forbes and Wallace building. There's a nice bench here for me. And as our textbook noted, in order to be considered to be included on the National Historical Registry, a building has to be over 50 years of age. Well, I'm here to tell you that this building was constructed before I was. I'm a little bit over 50. And so it represents more than 50 years of history, and it was a major commercial center. And it's just going to be, for the most part, bulldozed over or under. And what is going to be lost when that happens? And so people get very romantic when it comes to preservation when we're talking about an Art Deco building. And don't get me wrong, I also love Art Deco. But this is a multi-million-dollar facility, and it's going to be lost. Nothing will remain of it. And I said earlier that fortunately and unfortunately, because I live nearby here, and I know that when it is rebuilt as Eastfield Commons, I will benefit from the new mixed-use businesses that are located here, from unnamed big box retail stores to a Chick-fil-A, things we don't necessarily have nearby here. In addition to age, in order to be on the National Historic Registry of Buildings, a property has to be associated with events that made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. I think malls have done that through commerce and community. Or they could be associated with the lives of significant persons in our past. I'm not sure if Tiffany's mall tour in the 80s would qualify, but I'll offer that up too. 3, embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the works of a master. Master might be pushing it, but very distinctive. Or that possess high artistic values, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Or 4, have yielded or may be likely to yield information important in history or prehistory. And I think we've satisfied that. Still in the Eastfield Mall, and I've got the obligatory water fountain shot in the back. Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and I'm not suggesting by any stretch that Springfield's a great American city, but she noted that cultural centers that are unable to support a good bookstore, and in fact, Springfield doesn't have a retail bookstore in its city limits. There is one used bookstore. Civic centers that are avoided by all but bums who have fewer choices of loitering places than others. Commercial centers that are lackluster imitations of standardized suburban chain store shopping. Meantime, all the art and science of city planning are helpless to stem decay and the spiritlessness that precedes decay in ever more massive swatches of cities. Later, she notes, cities need old buildings so badly it is probably impossible for vigorous streets and districts to grow without them. By old buildings, I mean not museum piece old buildings, not old buildings in excellent and expensive state of rehabilitation, although those make fine ingredients, but also a lot of plain, ordinary, low-value old buildings, including some run-down old buildings. I'm now here in the food court at the Eastfield Mall, and there remains only 3 restaurants in it. Malls could use a Jane Jacobs as an advocate. In January 22nd, 1989, the Springfield Republican, the paper of record in Springfield, Mass., had an article titled Suburban Malls, New Downtowns of the 90s. However, just 10 years later, the Boston Globe reported on September 13, 1999, now the same urbanists who rallied to protect dying downtowns are working on solutions to a new crisis. What do you do with a dying mall? It seems like only yesterday that social critics were bemoaning the mall's success in colonizing America. No one foresaw the problem of mall failure. We are in the parking lot of the Lyman and Marywood Museum of Springfield History, and you can see the museum ahead of us where we'll be doing our research, and behind it is the One Monarch Place office tower, and that's where downtown Springfield is, which used to be a thriving retail center. Springfield had 3 major department stores: D.H. Brigham and Company, this is Brigham, Forbes and Wallace, we have Mr. Forbes there, and this is actually an elevator door panel. And where I used to always get pants as a little, the Steiger's Company from Albert Steiger. And one of my favorite stores, the old Johnson's bookstore. And you may be wondering, where was the old Forbes and Wallace? Well, it's actually on the site of that large office tower I showed you earlier, which is right next to the downtown shopping mall, Bay State West. And the malls ended up being one of the things that wiped out the retail area in Springfield, but it is preserved, and I use that word lightly, here in the Springfield Museum. I'm in downtown Springfield, which used to be the retail center for Springfield, Massachusetts. And in fact, behind me is what's known as Tower Square. Now, when it originally opened in the early 1970s, it was known as Bay State West, and it was an urban downtown shopping mall that was designed to save Springfield's retail. Instead, it probably put the last nail in the coffin of downtown retail. Now we're across the street, and we're in front of what used to be the Forbes and Wallace department store. In fact, this water wall is a testament, and you can see the old Forbes and Wallace symbol at the top there. It has since been re-envisioned as the Monarch Place office tower we saw from the museum. This empty lot is where the Steiger's department store used to be. It is now pretty much just an empty park that on occasion is used for downtown concerts. So I'm over here at the Springdale Mall across the street from the Eastfield Mall. And you're probably wondering where the mall is. It's now a Lowe's. And you can see behind the solar panels, it's also a Stop and Shop because it has already been demalled. The Springdale Mall was sort of the poor sibling, the younger brother of the Eastfield Mall. My wife tells me that when she worked at Toys R Us, which is now an Ocean State job lot, in the next plaza, that was only a strip mall, that they used to have to come over here to the Springdale Mall to compare prices at what was then known as Child World. And there was a Bradley's and a Lechmere's, department stores you've probably never heard of. It was always kind of a sad mall. It just really had an atrium with some smaller shops in it. But really the malls, what we've lost without the malls is some of that history. I know that at the Fairfield Mall, which we visited, that my grandfather, when he retired from Westinghouse, which is now a building that builds Chinese rail cars for the Boston T subway transit system, that's where he would hold court with his cronies and walk the mall. And my aunt would actually have a little kiosk at the Fairfield Mall where she would sell her stained glass. The Fairfield Mall actually became the cultural center for Chicopee. They moved things like the Kielbasa Festival, very big Polish population in the city of Chicopee, and they would hold it there in the mall. And as we've seen, it's now a parking lot. So there's no preservation of shopping malls to that degree. And again, I'm torn because I would really love to see a mall museum with a fully operational mall, Orange Julius and everything, to kind of capture that great moment in the 1980s. And yet, the reality is a lot of that retail space, such that it's needed in the age of Amazon delivery, can be better used. But maybe we could have one museum mall. So now I'm actually in front of the entrance, the mall side entrance of the old Steiger's building, Steiger's department store. And as you can see, it's been closed for quite some time. And it's actually featuring a liquidation sale, a tag sale to support the local women's professional clothing organization called Dress for Success. Eric Nelson, in his tribute to the Mall of America, wrote in 1998, 25 years ago, that malls are an inescapable feature of our common life. They seem inevitable as the weather, so familiar we hardly think about them anymore. Malls are a lens to magnify values in contemporary America, and yet they're fading away, forgotten. And while we make it a point to celebrate things such as Storeton Village and Sturbridge Village, where there's actually colonial reenactments, we don't really do that for 20th century history like shopping malls. And maybe we should.